Today I will tell you about the day my daughter-in-law hurled a cup of hot tea at me when I refused to give up the home I had worked my whole life to buy. She shouted that her son deserved it all now, as if I were nothing but a burden, taking up space. I walked away with skin burning, not only from the scalding water, but from the truth I had been avoiding. For years I had cooked in her kitchen, folded laundry in her house, tried to be grateful for the roof above my head. Yet in that single moment, I realized I was no longer family to her, only an obstacle between her and the promise of money. Days later, she returned to what she thought would be her victory, only to find silence waiting. A stranger in a suit sat inside holding papers she had never imagined. That was when she learned that money can betray just as easily as people. If you are listening now, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe and leave your thoughts below to follow more stories about grandma life stories, where every detail holds a lesson worth remembering. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 68 years old. For almost 3 decades, I worked as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Cincinnati. I thought I knew what pain was after witnessing broken bones, crushed bodies, and the final breaths of people who had run out of time. But life has a way of teaching you that some wounds do not bleed and some fractures cannot be seen on X-rays. A few months ago, I underwent hip surgery. They said it was because of years of standing and rushing down hospital corridors, holding patients steady when their own legs gave way. But deep inside, I could not help but think it wasn't just time that broke me. It was pressure, a force applied when no one else was looking. Maybe I fell that day in my kitchen because the floor was wet, or maybe because someone had left it that way. People tell me I imagine too much, that age plays tricks on memory. Still, I know the difference between accident and intention. I carry that suspicion quietly like a stone inside my pocket. After the operation, I could not return immediately to my own home. My house, the one I worked my whole life to buy, tucked in a quiet Cincinnati neighborhood, with red brick walls and a maple tree shading the front porch, stood locked rented to strangers. Instead, I stayed with my son, Mark, and his wife Chloe, in the suburbs of Columbus. Their house was modern, open plan with pale gray walls and stainless steel appliances that gleamed too much. But no matter how comfortable I never felt, it was mine to walk freely. My steps sounded too loud in the hallways. Even the ticking of my watch felt like an intrusion. I became a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Mark, my only child, had always been gentle, though not strong. A back injury ended his work at a construction firm, and since then, he seemed to drift in his own home, eyes lowered, letting Chloe decide everything. He rarely raised his voice, and when he did, it was only to agree. Chloe, well. Chloe had the kind of smile that could disarm neighbors at the mailbox. She baked cookies for church sales and spoke with warmth that made people believe she was a blessing to any family. But once the door shut behind her, that sweetness hardened into sharpness. Her words cut quicker than a scalpel. She managed every bill, every account, every prescription, and she reminded me often that without her, I would be lost. I kept quiet, watching the life I had built slip into her hands, strand by strand. Some evenings, while resting in the guest room they gave me, I would stare at the ceiling fan above spinning endlessly and wonder, how did I go from being a woman who steadied the hands of surgeons to a woman who couldn't steady her own place in her son's home? The answer came one morning when sunlight spilled across the kitchen table and my 16-year-old grandson, Leo, spoke without thinking. His voice was casual, almost playful as he leaned back in his chair. "Grandma, why don't you just let Mom sign the papers for your house? You don't really need it anymore. I mean, I'll get to live there one day, right?" His words landed heavier than he knew. My hand trembled slightly as I placed my teacup down. I looked at him, young, eager, full of a future he thought he already deserved. Then I spoke softly, carefully. "That house is mine, Leo. It is not for anyone else to decide." The air froze. Chloe, standing by the counter, turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. She placed her own cup of tea down with a deliberate sound. Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay something coiled and dangerous. "Eleanor, don't be selfish. Leo needs a future. Mark can't earn and you're not getting younger. What's the point of holding on to that place? Let the boy have it now." I shook my head, calm yet unyielding. That was when she snapped. In one sudden motion, she grabbed her cup and flung its scalding contents across the table. The liquid splashed my hand, searing my skin. I gasped, not from the burn, but from the betrayal. Chloe folded her arms, her voice sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Either sign the deed over to Leo or you walk out of this house. He deserves it all now." For a long second, I did not move. The pain radiated through my skin, but a different fire stirred inside me. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, deliberate, and it cut through the air like a knife. "Before the sun sets, I will leave this house, but they will not know what I'm planning to do." That day, as I stepped away from the table, clutching the burn that throbbed against my skin, I knew something had shifted. I was no longer a mother merely depending on the goodwill of her son and his wife. I was a woman about to reclaim her place in a story that had almost written me out. "Mom Chloe just has a temper," Mark said quickly, his voice soft as if smoothing over shattered glass could undo the shards. His words reached me but did not touch me. Behind him, Chloe's face was still twisted with fury. The teacup fragments scattered across the floor like proof of how low I had fallen in her house. Leo, her teenage son, hovered near the doorway, his eyes darting nervously from his mother to me, then back again. Chloe snapped her fingers at him, her tone sharp. "Go to your room. We'll talk later." Leo hesitated, chewing his lip. "But Mom..." Now she barked. He flinched and disappeared upstairs, his steps heavy with reluctance. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was electric, heavy with rage and calculation. Chloe lowered her voice, but I was close enough to hear. She leaned into Mark, her words slicing. "She refuses to sign. What do you expect me to do? Wait until she dies. By then the house will be worth half of what it is now, and Leo needs it today. That's his birthright." Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "Chloe, she just had surgery. She's not thinking clearly." Not thinking clearly, Chloe's laugh was short, bitter. "She's selfish, Mark. That woman is clinging to a property she doesn't even live in. Meanwhile, we're drowning in bills, and Leo, your son, needs $30,000 for tuition next year. Do you want him begging for scholarships while she sits on $350,000? That house could solve everything." Mark's voice trembled. "But it's her house. She worked for it. Worked for it." Chloe's tone sharpened further. "She was a nurse. Do you think being a nurse paid for that place in Cincinnati? No, it was luck, timing. And now she's squatting in our lives, acting like we owe her something. Mark, you either convince her to hand it over or we'll never have peace in this house. She was plotting, weaving a narrative where I was the villain and she was the hero fighting for her child's future." Mark, caught in her net, whispered, "Just give me time. She'll see reason." Chloe crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Time is what we don't have. The market is peaking. If we don't secure that deed now, we'll regret it. And Leo, he's already asking questions. He thinks we don't care about him. Do you want him to grow up believing his own grandmother loves money more than him?" Her manipulation was vicious. I glanced toward the staircase, half expecting Leo to peek out, but the house was still. Only Chloe's venom lingered in the air. I did not answer. My lips stayed sealed. My silence was not surrender. It was armor. Without a word, I turned, walking slowly into the living room. My hip ached from the surgery. My hand still trembled from the burn, but I refused to show pain. I lowered myself into the chair by the window, the room dim except for the thin slice of sunlight cutting across the carpet. My breath steadied as I reached for the small drawer in the side table. Inside was my old wallet. I pulled it out, the leather worn and soft familiar in a way nothing else in that house was. I opened it expecting comfort. Instead, emptiness stared back at me. No cards, no identification, no insurance papers. Even the folded photographs I once carried were gone. All that remained was the hollow frame of a life carefully erased. For a moment my chest tightened. It was not the scald of the tea, but the scorch of betrayal. This was not a sudden theft. It had been slow, deliberate, methodical. Every visit to the doctor, every errand they helped me with, had been another chance to strip away what belonged to me. My hand shook harder, but I clenched the wallet until the leather bent under my grip. I had lived under the illusion of safety, believing I was cared for, when in truth I had been cornered, like prey. The truth crystallized. I was not simply unwanted. I had been managed, silenced, reduced. My house was not just property to them, it was conquest, and I, Eleanor Vance, had been blind. From the kitchen, Chloe's voice pierced the air again, lower now, but edged with contempt. She'll cave. They always do when they realize they have nothing. Mark did not reply. His silence was almost worse than her cruelty. It confirmed what I had suspected. He had allowed this erosion piece by piece. Perhaps he told himself he was protecting me. Perhaps he convinced himself it was harmless. But silence can be as sharp as a blade. I sat in the dim light, the empty wallet heavy in my lap. My eyes traced the worn stitching, each thread like a memory of who I once was, a nurse who worked double shifts, a mother who built a home brick by brick, a woman who believed in family. Now I saw it clearly. I was not the one holding on too tightly. They were the ones desperate to strip me bare to rewrite my life as their possession. I did not cry. The tears had dried months ago, long before the tea burned my skin. Instead, a cold clarity settled in. I was at the edge of something irreversible. The sound of footsteps echoed upstairs. Leo, moving nervously in his room, caught between fear of me and fear of her. Chloe's laugh followed short and triumphant, as though victory were already hers. I lowered the wallet back into the drawer, my movement steady, deliberate. I closed it with care, the way one seals a promise. And in that silence, I said goodbye, not to them, but to the illusions I had carried. The mother who thought her son would shield her. The grandmother who believed love was enough. The woman who thought sacrifice would be honored. No. That version of me ended the moment I opened that empty wallet. I rose from the chair, my steps slow but unwavering. My farewell was not spoken aloud. It lived in the cold fire building within me. For the first time, I understood the cost of silence and the power it carried. This was not the end. It was only the turning point. The days that followed blurred together in silence. My arm still carried faint marks from the burn, but the sharper wound was hidden. It was the hollowness inside me, the ache of realizing everything I had saved had already been swallowed by greed. Then one Saturday morning, I smelled the smoke of charcoal drifting into the house. Laughter rose from the backyard. Chloe's voice cut through like a knife. "We'll make it perfect. Everyone will see what a generous hostess I am." I stood by the window watching her arrange platters of meat and vegetables as though she were the queen of this home. My home. Except the truth weighed heavy. The money she used for this so-called generosity came from accounts I had once carefully built, every dollar earned from long night shifts at Mercy General, and now she flaunted it like it was her triumph. Mark moved nervously around the grill, pretending to be helpful while Chloe gave orders. More ice for the coolers. Set the chairs in rows. And make sure my mother knows Eleanor will handle serving. She may be old, but she's still good for something. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. This was not just a barbecue. It was her stage, her way of tightening her grip over the family and rewriting the story of who provided. When the guests arrived, cousins, neighbors, friends from Leo's school, Chloe's performance began. She carried a glass of wine, her smile stretched too wide, her voice louder than necessary. "Please, everyone, enjoy yourselves. We've spared no expense today. After all, family deserves the best." Heads nodded in approval. Someone muttered, "Chloe really knows how to host." Another whispered, "Mark's lucky." I heard it all, each word landing like a lash across my skin. My lips pressed shut and my nails dug into my palm. At one point, Chloe turned sharply toward me, the fake smile fading for just a second. "Eleanor, fetch the extra plates from the kitchen. Quickly, please. The brisket won't serve itself." I moved my steps, slow but steady. Inside, the kitchen counters were crowded with bowls I had prepared earlier, though no one seemed to notice that. I carried plates back out, careful not to stumble. A hush fell as I passed, not from respect, but from the awkward sight of the grandmother pressed into service like hired help. Chloe seized the moment. With a mock sympathetic sigh, she announced loudly, "Poor Eleanor, she tries, but she's not as sharp as she used to be. That's why I handle the important things now." Laughter rippled across the patio. Not cruel, perhaps, but careless. Enough to humiliate. My jaw tightened. I wanted to shout, to remind them all who I was, what I had endured, what I had built. But my voice stayed locked inside. I caught Leo's eyes across the table. He looked away quickly, discomfort flickering before Chloe's glare fixed him back into place. Mark tried to soften it. "She means well," he murmured, barely audible. But Chloe wasn't finished. She leaned in closer to her friends, stage whispering just loud enough. "Eleanor can't manage money. Imagine if she tried. She would forget bills get scammed, lose everything. That's why I took responsibility. Someone has to be the adult here." Every muscle in my body froze. I bit down hard-tasting blood at the edge of my tongue. A cousin chuckled. "Good thing you're around Chloe. Not everyone can handle finances like you." "Yes," she preened, tossing her hair. "That's why I'm in charge. She's old. She doesn't know what's best anymore." My hands trembled around the serving spoon. Still, I moved, carrying food to the tables, nodding mechanically, playing the role she forced upon me. As the afternoon dragged on, Chloe made a show of generosity, handing out extra helpings, laughing loudly, pouring drinks. Yet every gesture was a blade. The people clapped her on the back, praising her kindness, while I stood in the shadows, invisible in the house I had built, the savings I had earned, the legacy I had once planned to leave, freely now stolen. Children played in the grass, music played faintly from a speaker, but underneath the cheer I felt the trap closing tighter. At one point, Chloe walked up, her wineglass raised. She leaned close, her voice dripping venom no one else could hear. "See how they love me? This is my family now. You are nothing but a guest until the paperwork makes it official." She tapped her glass against mine as though in toast. I did not lift mine. By dusk, when lanterns flickered and guests began drifting home, I stood by the door, aching and silent. My body was weary, but my mind burned like wildfire. I overheard one final sting as Chloe's friend clasped her arm. "You've done so much for everyone. Truly remarkable. Eleanor must be proud of you." Chloe smiled, radiant, false. "Of course. She knows I'm the only one capable of keeping this family secure." The words seared into me hotter than the tea she had thrown days earlier. For in that moment, the truth sharpened inside me. She wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was erasing me. I forced my lips into a faint smile for the departing guests. My hands, though trembling, held steady. Inside, something shifted. I would not be erased, not by her, not by anyone. That night, after the last dish was shoved into the sink and the last cruel laugh echoed in my ears, I sat in the dark living room, my hands trembling on the armrest. My silence had become my prison, but the fire in my chest refused to go out. I reached for the phone, staring at the faded numbers I had memorized decades ago. For years, I had told myself I shouldn't bother her, that she deserved peace and retirement. But tonight, I needed a voice that still believed in me. I dialed. The line clicked. Then a warm but steady voice answered. "Eleanor." "My God, is that you, Brenda?" I whispered, and then the dam broke. Words poured out about the tea burning my skin, the laughter at the barbecue, the empty wallet I discovered in my drawer. I confessed the shame I had swallowed, the humiliation Chloe draped over me in front of everyone. Brenda listened without interruption, the way only a seasoned attorney and an old friend could. I could almost see her sitting straight-backed in her small study glasses perched on her nose, her pen scratching notes, even though she no longer worked cases. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm, but edged with steel. "Eleanor, what they're doing isn't just cruel, it's calculated. Chloe's building a narrative painting you as weak, incapable, so no one questions when she takes everything." I closed my eyes. Hearing it said aloud made the air in the room heavier. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was just too tired. No, Brenda cut in firmly. "You're not crazy, you're not weak. They want you to believe that because it makes stealing easier. Tell me exactly what you've lost so far." I swallowed. The accounts, savings, even the small checking account I used for groceries. She convinced Mark to transfer management for my security. Now I can't even buy bread without asking. A sharp breath from the other end. "And your house." "They want me to sign it over. She says her son deserves it already." I refused. Brenda's tone hardened. "Good. Don't you dare sign anything. Not a slip of paper, not a post-it note. If she so much as slides a pen your way, you call me first." My throat tightened. "I don't know if I can fight her, Brenda. She's relentless. And I'm alone here." There was a pause, then her voice softened, laced with the warmth of the friend I once knew in college. "Eleanor, you are not alone. You still have me. Do you remember what we said in our 20s after pulling those endless nights of study? The world doesn't get to tell us who we are? That still holds true." I smiled through tears, a memory flashing two young women huddled over law textbooks in the library, daring to believe they could carve their own paths. I thought I'd buried that woman, Brenda. She feels like a ghost now. "Then we'll bring her back," Brenda replied, "piece by piece, starting tomorrow." Her words pressed against my ribs like a steady heartbeat. I leaned closer to the receiver, whispering the fear that had stalked me for years. What if they turn everyone against me? They've already convinced half the family I'm senile. Brenda's chuckle was short but sharp. "Then we'll give them a new story to believe. Trust me, juries, families, neighbors, it doesn't matter. People follow evidence, and I've spent my life gathering it. We'll show them the truth." For the first time in months, my chest lifted with air that didn't feel poisoned. I asked quietly, "Why are you doing this for me? You could tell me to let it go, to make peace. You're retired, Brenda. You deserve rest." Her answer came without hesitation. "Because you're my friend, because justice doesn't retire, and because I've seen too many women let themselves be erased by louder voices. Not you, Eleanor. Not on my watch." My hands tightened around the phone. What should I do first? Brenda's tone shifted into command. "Tomorrow morning you'll come to my house. Bring whatever documents you still have, deeds, bank statements, anything. Don't worry if you think they're useless. I'll see what matters. Tonight lock your bedroom door and promise me you won't argue with Chloe again until we have a plan." I hesitated, then whispered, "I promise." There was silence for a beat, then her voice softened again. "You've endured more than you should have. But endurance isn't the same as defeat. Tomorrow is the first day you stop surviving and start fighting." The call ended, but her words lingered, echoing in the hollow spaces of the house. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like prey. I felt awake. I rose from the chair, walked to my bedroom, and locked the door behind me. My reflection in the mirror was weary, bruised by humiliation, but in my eyes there was a glimmer I hadn't seen in so long: resolve. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, yet inside me a storm was gathering. Chloe believed she had erased me. Tomorrow she would learn I was still here. Brenda's final words repeated in my mind like a drumbeat. "Tomorrow come to me. I understand." And I knew then this was no longer just about surviving her cruelty. This was the beginning of war. Brenda drove me out of town the next afternoon, the sun sliding through tall oaks that lined the road. I watched the houses blur past each yard, trimmed each porch calm, and I wondered how many other women like me were trapped behind those doors, silenced by fear. When Brenda finally turned onto a wide lane marked Willow Creek Senior Community, I felt my chest tighten. We passed an open gate where two elderly men waved cheerfully. Beyond it stretched gardens glowing with late summer blooms, walking paths, winding through tall grass, and a pond glittering under the afternoon sun. Koi fish flashed orange and white beneath the surface, their slow arcs, hypnotic calming. Brenda parked. "Come on," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You need to see this." Inside the main building, warm light poured through high windows. A piano played in the distance, steady and bright, not professional but full of joy. I followed the sound, and in a wide common room, I saw a man in his 80s tapping away at the keys, while others clapped along. Some danced their steps, clumsy but fearless. Across the room, two women played chess near a fireplace. Another group was gathered around a long table, threading beads to make bracelets for a local fundraiser. Laughter bounced off the walls, unrestrained and free. No one looked over their shoulder. No one waited for permission to speak. I lingered by the door, afraid to step further, as if this world might vanish if I intruded. Brenda placed a hand on my shoulder. "This isn't charity," she whispered. "It's power. People who refuse to disappear." A woman with silver curls noticed me and approached. She wore a bright scarf and carried herself with the kind of ease I hadn't felt in decades. "New face?" she asked, smiling wide. Brenda answered before I could. "Just visiting for now." The woman chuckled. "That's what I said 3 years ago. Now they can't get rid of me." She winked and walked back to her chessboard. We moved toward the library tucked into a side hall. Shelves lined the walls stacked with novels, biographies, law books, some well-worn, others crisp and new. A reading circle sat near the window, a dozen people leaning in as one man read a passage aloud. His voice trembled, but no one interrupted. No one hurried him. I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I sat in a room where patience was allowed to exist. Outside again, Brenda guided me to a shaded bench near the koi pond. A few residents strolled by, greeting us like old friends, though they'd never seen me before. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in years' choice. I turned to Brenda, my voice shaking but certain. I had forgotten what it feels like to choose for myself. Her eyes softened. "And that's why I brought you here. You needed to see what freedom looks like, Eleanor. This is your reminder you're still allowed to live on your own terms." The air smelled of cut grass and pond water, clean and alive. Across the way, children from the local school painted birdhouses, with some of the residents, their laughter sharp and bright against the breeze. I realized Willow Creek wasn't only a refuge, it was a bridge. The elderly here weren't locked away, they were contributors, mentors, the heartbeat of a larger community. One man was teaching a teenager how to mend a fishing rod. Another group sorted boxes of donated clothes to send downtown. Their hands worked slowly, but their intent was fierce. Watching them, I felt the contrast strike deep. At home, Chloe treated me like a relic, useless, fragile, a burden to be hidden. Here, these men and women stood as proof that age wasn't an erasure. It was ammunition. For the first time in so long, I drew in a full breath without fear. The laughter, the music, the koi swirling like brushstrokes beneath the surface, it all wrapped around me like armor. I whispered almost to myself, "Maybe I'm not done yet." Brenda nodded, her gaze steady. "You're far from done. You just needed to remember what living without chains feels like." The sun dipped lower, casting golden stripes across the water. I let the warmth settle into my skin, let the sounds of freedom engrave themselves into me. I hadn't told anyone here about Chloe, about Mark, about the humiliation burning through my days. That truth remained mine to guard for now, but already I sensed that one day soon, this place, these people would become part of my fight. As we left Willow Creek, I turned for one last glance. The piano was still playing faint but resolute. It followed me to the car into the night, a reminder that there was still music waiting inside me too, and I swore silently that I would not let Chloe silence it again. The first thing Brenda asked me to do was bring every bank statement I still had. She spread them across her kitchen table, the papers rustling like restless wings. I sat opposite her, my hands trembling, as I pointed out highlighted lines. There, she said, tapping the page, and there. These transfers, 200 here, 500 there, always at odd hours. Who makes PayPal withdrawals at 3 in the morning? The numbers blurred before me. Dozens of small amounts bled together into thousands. My stomach clenched. I remembered nights when I heard movement in the hallway, Chloe's bedroom light faint under the crack of her door. I had dismissed it as insomnia. Now I knew better. Brenda pushed her glasses higher on her nose. This isn't carelessness, Eleanor. It's strategy. Someone is draining you slow enough that you'd never notice until the well ran dry. I felt a sharp pain at the back of my throat. Rage wanted to surge, but I forced it down. I would not give Chloe the satisfaction of seeing me broken. That evening, Brenda introduced me to a woman from Willow Creek named Marianne Doyle. She was tall, with clipped gray hair and a firm handshake. Once Brenda whispered Marianne had worked as an investigator for a private insurance company. She had the kind of steady gaze that made lying impossible. Marianne sat with us arms crossed, listening as Brenda laid out the pattern of transactions. She didn't interrupt until the very end. I've seen this before, Marianne said flatly, and it rarely ends without legal maneuvering. You mentioned Chloe visiting the bank. Yes, I answered quietly. She goes at least once a week. Sometimes she comes back flushed, almost glowing. Other times she's snapping at everyone. I thought it was just her temper. Marianne leaned forward. Did she ever mention who she was meeting? I shook my head. Brenda cut in her tone sharp. She doesn't need to mention it. I asked around. Eleanor's daughter-in-law hasn't just been going to the bank. She's been spotted walking out with a lawyer. Same man every time. The room fell silent. I heard the tick of the clock on Brenda's wall, the faint hum of traffic outside. I swallowed. A lawyer. Marianne's jaw tightened. Do you know his name? Brenda slid a slip of paper across the table. Mr. Halpern. The name hit me like a stone. I knew it. He had drawn up the original deed to my home years ago when Mark and I still pretended at civility. He had shaken my hand, assured me everything was in order. Now the puzzle fit together with ruthless clarity. Chloe's secret trips, the odd transactions, the way she'd hovered over me with pen and paper weeks before. And then Leo. Sweet, naive Leo coaxed into believing he would inherit a home that wasn't Chloe's to give. Brenda unfolded another document, crisp and official looking. This was pulled from county filings yesterday. You need to see it. I leaned in. My breath stalled. The paper bore my name, my address, but the signature scrawled at the bottom was not mine. It mimicked my handwriting, but sloppily, as if rushed. I felt heat crawl up my neck. They forged me. Marianne nodded grimly. Not just forged. Halpern notarized it. He's prepared to shift the deed to Leo as soon as certain conditions are met. My chair creaked as I leaned back, gripping the arms to steady myself. For a moment, the room wavered, as though the ground itself was tilting. Chloe hadn't just stolen money, she had dared to steal my very name, my place in the world. I pressed my palm against the table, steadying my breath. The rage that had threatened to consume me earlier now burned differently, colder, sharper, honed into resolve. Brenda studied me carefully. Eleanor, I know what you're thinking. Don't rush. We need precision. One wrong step and she'll bury this deeper. I didn't answer right away. My gaze was fixed on that false signature, the looped E, mocking me from the page. Finally, I spoke each word deliberate. She thinks I'm too weak to notice. She believes she's smarter, faster, untouchable. She's wrong. Marianne's eyes narrowed, approving. That's the spirit you'll need. If you're ready to fight, we'll gather every scrap of proof, every withdrawal, every forged file. She can hide from guilt, but not from paper. I straightened my spine. The weight on my chest eased, replaced by something solid like steel, knitting itself together inside me. She's been calculating every move. I whispered, my voice low but unshaken. My eyes met Brenda's, then Marianne's. But so can I. Brenda placed her hand gently over mine. Her touch was warm, steady, the anchor I didn't know I needed. Then it begins here, Eleanor. Tonight we don't bow. We prepare. I nodded once sharply. The humiliation of Chloe's laughter, the sting of hot tea, the whispers around that barbecue table, all of it hardened into fuel. She had cornered me long enough. I gathered the statements into a neat stack, my hands no longer trembling. The forged document lay on top, glaring like an open wound. I let it sit there, not hidden, not ignored. Tomorrow, I said firmly, we build my case. And when the time comes, she won't see me coming. The morning I walked into the notary's office, the air smelled of polished wood and ink. My heels struck the marble floor with a rhythm I hadn't heard from myself in years, steady, purposeful. Brenda flanked me like a silent shield, while Marianne lingered near the door, scanning the room as if danger could slip in unnoticed. The clerk behind the counter looked up. Mrs. Harris. Yes, I said, my voice clear. I'm here to finalize the trust. He gestured me forward, his eyes flicking toward the thick stack of documents already laid out on the oak desk. The words, irrevocable living trust, stood bold across the top. That phrase alone was a fortress stronger than any lock or key I'd ever placed on my front door. I sat down. My fingers grazed the smooth edge of the pen they handed me. For a split second, the weight of the years I'd been cornered pressed on my chest. Chloe's sneers, her casual cruelty, the sting of hot tea across my skin. But then I saw the first line. The property at 119 Maple Street, current appraised value. $350,000 is to be transferred into the trust. The pen clicked. My signature flowed firm and deliberate across every page. Each stroke wasn't just ink, it was a reclaiming of power. When I reached the final page, I pressed harder, as if carving my name into stone. The notary affixed his seal with a heavy stamp. It's done, he said, done. My house, my sanctuary, my history. My proof that I had built a life with my own two hands was now beyond Chloe's reach. Brenda placed her hand on my shoulder. You've just built a wall she'll never scale. I exhaled long and slow. Then let her come. I'm ready. From that day forward, the battle shifted underground. The bank became my quiet ally. Behind the teller counters and polished glass doors, managers coordinated with me and Brenda. Each time Chloe marched in demanding updates or whispering with Mr. Yu. Halpern, the answer was always the same. System maintenance, ma'am. Please check back later. I pictured her manicured nails drumming against the counter, lips pressed thin with frustration. Perhaps she thought technology had betrayed her, not realizing it was my will, my decision, that blocked her path. The months turned into seasons. Leaves burned orange and red snow fell heavy and white, and still Chloe circled like a hawk denied its prey. She lived lavishly, believing her victory inevitable. Designer purses, expensive spa visits, dinners charged without hesitation, all funded by the drips of money she still siphoned. But the core, my house, my anchor, stood untouchable. Some nights lying awake, I imagined the look on her face when she discovered the truth, the shock, the disbelief, the rage. That image kept me steady through every day of pretending not to know, of nodding politely when she strutted into my kitchen with Leo at her side, flaunting a false sense of triumph. One afternoon, nearly a year into this silent war, Brenda invited me back to her office. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, though she hadn't touched one in years, old habit lingering in the walls. She spread fresh statements across the table. She's growing reckless, Brenda muttered, tapping the figures. More withdrawals, larger amounts. It's almost as if she feels the finish line is near. Marianne crossed her arms, her expression sharp. She thinks she already owns the house. That's why she's spending like there's no tomorrow. I studied the papers, my jaw set. She believes the house is hers. She believes Leo will walk into it as if it's his birthright. Brenda's lips curved into a cold smile, and she has no idea that every step she takes is a step deeper into quicksand. The trust documents remained locked in the bank's vault, untouchable, impenetrable. Even Halpern's forged paperwork had no power now. He could notarize until his ink dried out without my consent. Without my knowledge of the trust, all his efforts turned to ash. Yet I didn't reveal a single thing. I let Chloe bask in her illusion. It was a theater I directed, though she believed herself the star. I played the role of the weary grandmother, nodding when she ranted, staying silent when she gloated. I set the table, poured tea, even smiled faintly when she bragged about Leo's future as the lord of the house. Inside, though, my resolve sharpened like a blade against a whetstone. The day she stormed back from the bank, red-faced and fuming, I caught her reflection in the window before she even entered. She slammed her purse on the counter, muttering curses under her breath. "What happened?" I asked mildly, stirring a pot of soup. Nothing, she snapped too quickly. Her eyes darted away, but not before I saw the flicker of doubt. Brenda's voice echoed in my memory. Patience, Eleanor. Let her trap herself. So I said nothing more. 1 year and 3 months passed. A long campaign, drawn and grueling, but every day had been worth it. The trust had stood firm, the bank shielding me with practiced precision. My house, valued at $350,000, remained mine. And Chloe, she remained oblivious, her greed blinding her to the wall I had built stone by stone. The turning point wasn't just in ink or paper. It was inside me. The Eleanor who once flinched at every raised voice, who endured humiliation at her own table, who sat quietly while others plotted her downfall, that woman no longer existed. I looked into the mirror one morning and barely recognized the face staring back. My eyes were steady, sharper, my shoulders squared. There was no trace of the victim Chloe thought she owned. I whispered to my reflection not a promise, but a declaration. She thinks she has won, but the house is mine. My life is mine. And from now on, I choose the battleground. Leo showed up at my door late one evening, his hoodie, half-zipped earbuds dangling around his neck. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the faint sweetness of soda on his breath. "Grandma," he whispered, "you don't really need all that money. You just need to sign the papers. Mom says it'll make everything easier." The words stung not because of what he said, but because of how easily he repeated them, like a line rehearsed in front of a mirror. His eyes darted away from mine, restless, as if the truth lived somewhere just beyond my gaze, and he was too afraid to meet it. Easier for who I asked, my voice cutting through the silence of the living room. "For all of us," he muttered. "Tuition's expensive. I've got classes, books, fees. Mom says if you just stop being stubborn, everything would fall into place." I studied him. He was tall now, shoulders squared by youth, not by strength. Yet in that moment, he looked smaller than ever. "Leo," I said slowly, "if you wanted help, you could have come to me like a man. Not as your mother's echo." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand. College is everything. Without money, I'm stuck." "Don't you want me to succeed?" "I do," I replied. "But not at the price of my home, not through lies, not through theft." The slam of the front door announced Mark's arrival. He shuffled in exhausted from work, his tie loosened, his hair damp from the rain. He dropped his briefcase on the floor with a dull thud. "Dad, Leo snapped, tell her. Tell Grandma to stop making this harder than it is." Mark's eyes flicked to me, then away, as if I were a mirror he couldn't bear to face. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I'm tired, Mom. So tired. Please. Don't stir things up. Don't cause trouble." My chest tightened. Trouble is defending what's mine. Trouble is asking for respect. Trouble. He sighed, shoulders sagging, and repeated the same words like a mantra. "I'm tired, Mom. Don't make waves. Don't make waves." His indifference cut deeper than Leo's greed. My son, my own flesh and blood, chose silence, chose weariness, chose peace over justice. He handed me over to Chloe without lifting a finger. The following weeks turned uglier. I overheard Leo in the yard one Saturday afternoon leaning against the fence with a neighbor. His voice carried easily through the open window. "She doesn't care," he complained. "My grandma doesn't even help with tuition. Can you believe that everyone else's grandparents pitch in, but not her? She just hoards the money." The neighbor made a sound of sympathy, and Leo's voice swelled, fueled by the attention. "She acts like she's the victim, but she's just selfish. She doesn't want me to have a future." Each word was a twist of the knife. He painted me as a miser, a villain hoarding scraps while my family suffered, and the neighborhood listened. Whispers traveled from porch to porch, nods of agreement blooming in places I once called friendly. But Willow Creek heard too, and they refused to stay silent. The next week, Brenda organized a small gathering at the community hall. I arrived to find the koi pond glimmering under lantern-light laughter spilling from the library and the faint sound of piano drifting through the halls. The elders gathered like an army in plain clothes, faces sharp with resolve. When Leo's version of events reached them, they responded with fire. Selfish Marianne snapped during one of the meetings. "She's the reason half of us even know how to navigate the online banking system. She saved me from losing my savings to a scammer last year." Another elder, Mr. Caldwell, leaned on his cane, eyes blazing. If she didn't stand firm, that house would already be gone. She's protecting her legacy. Any fool who calls that selfish doesn't know the meaning of sacrifice. Their voices rose, filling the hall, cutting through the lies that seeped from my grandson's lips. They weren't just defending me, they were drawing a line in the sand. Back home, Leo confronted me again. His face was red, his words sharp. "You're turning everyone against me. The neighbors think you're some hero now, but they don't know how you really are." I straightened my voice steady. "They know enough. They know the truth you refuse to see." He jabbed a finger toward me. "You could fix this in a second. Just sign. Just give me what I deserve." I stepped closer, my shadow stretching across the floor between us. "Deserve, you haven't earned a thing. Respect, sacrifice, loyalty, those are earned. You're chasing an inheritance that isn't yours to take." He faltered, but only for a moment. Then he turned on his heel, storming out. Mark stood by the doorway, watching it unfold. He didn't intervene. He didn't defend. He just whispered again, weakly, "Please, Mom, don't fight. I can't handle more fighting." I looked at him, my son, once a boy, who used to run to me when thunderstorms shook the house, and all I saw was a man hollowed out by cowardice. His refusal wasn't neutral. It was betrayal by neglect. That night, I sat at my window staring out at the quiet street. My family had turned me into a villain in my own story. My grandson spread rumors of selfishness. My son begged for silence. But behind me, Willow Creek stood tall. They knew what was at stake. They knew the cost of surrender. Their loyalty became my shield, their voices my counterweight against the lies. For the first time, I realized blood didn't define who stood with you in battle. Choice did. And I had chosen my side. The news spread through Willow Creek like a fire that refused to die. The story was no longer mine alone, it belonged to the town now. People whispered in church pews, argued in grocery aisles, and rallied in the community hall. Chloe's name, once spoken with respect, now carried a sour taste. The facade cracked, and for the first time she could no longer control the narrative. Then the letter came. A thick envelope stamped with the court seal dropped into her pristine mailbox. Inside, the notification was simple, yet devastating. The house was locked in an irrevocable trust. Irrevocable. No loopholes, no last-minute trick. The game she had played in the shadows was no longer hers to win. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but the sound of her fury reached me days later, carried by neighbors who had seen her storm out of the post office, the papers crushed in her fist. "She can't do this," she screamed. "That house is ours. Do you hear me? Ours." And so she came dragging Mark and Leo behind her straight to Willow Creek's community center where I sat waiting. That morning, I chose calm. I slipped into my navy cardigan, the one with pearl buttons, poured myself a pot of Earl Grey, and walked into the activity hall like it was my courtroom. The wide windows overlooked the garden, the sun cutting a pale ribbon of light across the polished floor. I sat at the table near the glass wall teacup in hand, as though nothing in the world could shake me. Through the glass door, I saw Chloe arrive. She shoved past the parking lot attendants, her heels striking the pavement like gunshots. Mark trailed 2 steps behind, shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact with everyone he passed. And Leo, poor boy, looked more like a puppet, yanked by invisible strings, his eyes darting nervously, as if already ashamed to be here. But Chloe, she was fire incarnate. Her voice ripped through the courtyard. "Open this door, I demand to speak with her." The security volunteers, all retirees who had spent their lives defending dignity in quieter battles, stood their ground. One lifted a hand calmly. "Ma'am, this facility is private. Members only. I don't care," she spat. Her face twisted crimson, spreading across her cheeks. "She's hiding in there and she thinks she's won. No, she doesn't win. That house is mine and I'll prove it." I sipped my tea, eyes steady on her through the glass. The barrier between us was more than wood and steel. It was the visible line of power. For years, she had pulled me down into her arena. But now she stood outside, fists pounding against walls she couldn't break. What infuriated her most wasn't just the trust or the locked paperwork, it was the shift in allegiance. The town no longer nodded when she spoke. They looked away. The neighbors she once charmed avoided her eye. Even the bank manager who had once welcomed her with practiced smiles now hid behind formal procedures and polite delays. She had lost the weapon of perception. And in her world, that was worse than losing money. Through the glass, her rage sharpened into threats. "You think this is over. You think you can outsmart me with your little legal tricks. I'll take this further. I'll challenge the trust. I'll drag you through every court until you beg to give up. You're old Eleanor. You don't have years to fight me. But I do." Her words hit the glass like stones, but I didn't flinch. I set the cup down gently, letting the porcelain kiss the saucer with a chime that only I could hear. My eyes never left hers. "You've already lost," I whispered under my breath. Mark stepped forward, then voice low, trying to pull her back. "Chloe, maybe we should just go home. This isn't the place." She spun on him, venom dripping from every syllable. "You weak fool. You can't even stand up for your family. Do you know what people are saying about us, about me, because of her?" She jabbed her finger toward the glass. Mark's eyes dropped, his silence condemning him more than any insult. Leo tried next, his voice cracking. "Mom, please, this is embarrassing." But Chloe was past reason. Her mind spun faster than her words, calculating, scheming, desperate. She started listing what she could still do: hire a new lawyer, plant stories about me in the local paper, even file for guardianship, claiming I wasn't fit to handle my affairs. The crowd gathering outside stiffened at her words. Even those who had remained neutral shifted uneasily, glancing toward me with silent solidarity. I didn't move, didn't rise, didn't argue. My silence became the loudest statement in that room. She was the one unraveling, clawing at doors that wouldn't open while I sat safe, untouchable. The roles had flipped. The predator stood outside the prey, no longer afraid. She banged her fists once more, the sound echoing against the glass. "She can't do this. That house is ours." Her scream hung in the air, raw and desperate. But no one moved to help her. No one came to her defense. I lifted my teacup again, raised it slightly toward the window, a gesture so small yet sharp as a blade, and then I drank calm and deliberate, as though I were toasting her downfall. Her eyes widened fury, colliding with fear, because at last she understood. The game was no longer hers. That night, when the hall emptied and the sun fell, I lingered by the window. Chloe had left in a storm, dragging Mark and Leo back into the shadows with her. But her threat still lingered in the air. She would not stop. She would claw and scheme, try new angles, spread new lies. Yet the balance had shifted forever. For the first time, she was the outsider pounding at the glass, and I was the one holding the key. 2 days after the shouting outside Willow Creek, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. Heavy cream paper, neat handwriting on the front, sealed with care. For a moment, I hesitated, the weight of it pressing in my hands. When I opened it, a folded note slipped out with a check $5,000 signed in Chloe's name. The letter began with flourishes, every word polished. Dear Eleanor, I've reflected on how harsh I've been. Families fight, but blood is thicker than pride. This money is only a token. Let me make amends. Let us start again. Your daughter-in-law, Chloe. My throat tightened. A part of me, the part that had once rocked her son to sleep and opened my home to her, ached to believe her. The words were carefully chosen, soft as silk, designed to pierce through my defenses. And the check, $5,000. Enough to sound generous, not enough to feel like charity. It was bait, and I felt the hook tugging at me. That evening, I set the letter on my kitchen table. Brenda stopped by, as she often did, bringing fresh bread. Her sharp eyes caught the envelope before I could slide it aside. "What's this?" she asked. I sighed. An apology, or at least, she wants me to think so. Brenda skimmed the words, her lips tightening. "May I?" she asked, picking up the check. She tilted it toward the light, examining the ink. Then her eyes narrowed. "This signature is wrong." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She set the check flat, her finger tapping under Chloe's swirling scrawl. The H Chloe always loops it wide. This one's tight, stiff, forged. A cold ripple spread through me. My hand curled slowly into a fist. Brenda slid the paper back toward me. "She doesn't want peace, Eleanor. She wants proof you'll cash this. The second you do, she'll spin it as you owed her, and this was repayment." The trap revealed itself in an instant. My heart pounded, not from sorrow, but from the sick clarity of how far Chloe would go. 3 days later, another call came. The bank manager's voice was steady but carried tension. "Mrs. Gray, I think you should come in. We've noticed something unusual." At the branch, the manager placed a thin file on the desk. "Over the last month, someone attempted multiple withdrawals from your accounts using documents that didn't check out. Fake IDs, falsified authorizations, sloppy copies of your signature. Each time, we blocked them. But the attempts are increasing. My blood ran cold. And who tried this?" He met my eyes, then looked away. The paperwork listed Chloe's name. The room tilted, my breath shallow. It wasn't just manipulation now, it was theft planned, methodical, escalating. Because Chloe's scheme outside Willow Creek had failed, she had turned to quieter weapons. If she couldn't storm the gates, she would crawl through cracks, forging papers, fabricating permission. I pressed my palm flat against the polished desk. How many times he opened the file? 4 attempts in 2 weeks, each time under a different pretense, one as a medical expense, another as tuition for her son, another labeled maintenance on family property. All rejected. The words struck like blows. Tuition. She had even dragged Leo into this as justification. I pictured the boy repeating her words. "Grandma doesn't care about me, she won't help." Lies woven into official lines. I straightened. I want every attempt logged, every detail, and I want a notification the second anyone tries again. The manager nodded quickly. "Already set up. We thought you should know." That night, I sat at my desk, the letter, and forged check beside the bank reports. I read her words again, but now the apology dripped with venom. Families fight, but blood is thicker than pride. It wasn't an apology. It was a weapon wrapped in sentiment sharpened with deceit. I closed my eyes, replaying Brenda's warning. She doesn't want peace, Eleanor. She wants evidence. And the bank manager's voice. 4 attempts in 2 weeks. Chloe wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. Some days later, Brenda joined me again, bringing a tray of tea this time. She listened as I explained the bank reports, her brows drawn tight. "She's desperate," Brenda muttered. "Desperation makes people sloppy, but it also makes them dangerous. This isn't just greed anymore. It's obsession." I nodded, fingers brushing the forged signature. "She thinks if she keeps pressing, I'll snap, that I'll give her something she can twist." Brenda leaned forward. "Then don't give her anything. Let her choke on her own schemes." 2 nights after that, I dreamed I was holding the check again, except this time the ink bled across the paper, staining my hands. I woke in a sweat heart hammering. I walked to the kitchen, lit only by the glow of the fridge. I opened the drawer, pulled out the check, and tore it clean in 2. The sound was sharp, final. No part of me wanted to believe her anymore. Every move she made only tightened the walls around her. Still, a chill lingered at the edges of my resolve. Because Chloe wasn't finished, not by a long shot. I saw it in the venom of her letter, in the brazen use of Leo's tuition as a weapon in the shameless reach into bank vaults she thought she could crack open. She wasn't apologizing. She was circling. And I knew the next strike would come harder. Weeks passed, and Chloe's silence wasn't peace. It was plotting. I knew it in my bones. Every time the phone rang, every time an envelope landed at my door, I braced for another strike. And then it came. She tried again. The bank called one afternoon. The manager's voice was clipped brisk. "Mrs. Gray, there's been another attempt. A large withdrawal request under your name." The system flagged it. This time, the documents were cleaner, harder to catch. But the digital trail gives her away. We're required to escalate. My stomach tightened. Escalate to where the Elder Protection Unit. They'll open a file. For a moment, I could hear only the hum of the line. Elder Protection. That phrase carried weight. It meant the system finally recognized I wasn't imagining Chloe's games, wasn't exaggerating her greed. They had proof now, and once the law touched it, the wheels turned slowly, but they turned. 2 weeks later, an investigator came to Willow Creek. A woman in her 40s, firm handshake, calm tone. She spread documents across the table in the community office, each sheet marked with Chloe's fingerprints of deceit, altered signatures, false IDs, banking slips. "Your daughter-in-law has been using legal loopholes to stall," the investigator explained. "Her attorney files delays motions, anything to slow us down. That's why it's taken this long. But the evidence is consistent. Too consistent to ignore." I watched her slide one paper toward me. My name, my handwriting, except it wasn't. "She's getting better," I murmured, each forgery closer to the real thing. The investigator nodded grimly, which is exactly why the case is strong. Intent is clear. Months dragged. Chloe's lawyers pulled every thread they could, claims of misunderstanding, requests for mediation letters, dressed up as reconciliation. She argued she was simply helping manage her elderly mother-in-law's finances out of care. Each stunt delayed hearings, each motion bought her time. But time wasn't her ally anymore, because every delay built a thicker file against her. Every forged attempt, every bounced check, every phone call to the bank piled higher. The law didn't rush, but it remembered. The tension built like storm clouds over Willow Creek. Neighbors whispered in the halls. Brenda shook her head at me in quiet fury. "She's drowning, Eleanor, doesn't even see it. She's clawing at money that isn't hers while the law builds a cage around her." And she was right. Because one morning, another call came. The same bank manager, sharper this time Mrs. Gray. She tried again today. 5 figures. Direct transfer request with a notarized letter claiming medical necessity. Except the notary stamp was fake. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice low. We had no choice. The system automatically flagged it as fraud and pushed it to the police. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at the darkened garden. For months, Chloe had thought herself untouchable. She had lawyers' connections, her husband's silence, her son's excuses. She had the arrogance of someone who thought the law bent to money and intimidation. But now the law wasn't bending. It was tightening. Some days later, the investigator returned, this time with 2 officers in plain clothes. They asked questions, sharp, precise, unrelenting. When did you first notice attempts to access your finances? How often did she contact you directly about money? Did she ever threaten verbally or otherwise? I answered each one, steady, deliberate. My heart hammered, but I knew this mattered. They weren't just listening. They were building. Finally, the officer closed his notebook. The case will proceed. Slowly. These things always do. But understand, once fraud leaves paper and enters the criminal system, there's no undoing it. The next week, Chloe appeared at Willow Creek. Not with an apology this time, not even with her usual arrogance. She stormed through the lobby, dragging Leo behind her, shouting my name. She can't do this to me. That money is mine, that house is mine. She's making me look like a criminal. Security stepped in, blocking her path. Behind the glass wall of the activity room, I watched her thrash against reality, fury twisting her face. Leo stood, pale eyes darting as if he finally saw what his mother was. And I didn't move. I simply sat spine straight, teacup steady in my hand. For the first time, Chloe was on the outside, her voice muffled by barriers she couldn't push through. Weeks stretched into months. Court notices arrived. Chloe's lawyers filed counterclaims, delays, petitions. But with every move, her footing slipped. Each forged attempt was evidence. Each desperate withdrawal marked intent. The net closed tighter. The process wasn't fast. It wasn't neat. But it was relentless. And as the weeks bled into months, I understood something vital. Chloe had spent years convincing herself that family, money, and the law all bent to her will. But the law wasn't family. It didn't bend. It constricted. And now it was closing in. 6 months of hearings, 6 months of delays, motions, endless filings by Chloe's attorneys. Every time I walked into the courthouse in Ohio, the same tension pressed down the air. Thick, the benches filled with spectators, reporters scribbling in quiet corners. This wasn't private anymore. Everyone in town knew. On the final day, I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded tight, heart pounding steady but firm. Across the aisle, Chloe dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her lawyer whispering rehearsed lines into her ear. When the judge entered the room, rose. The gavel struck once, and silence fell heavy. Chloe's attorney stood first, gesturing toward her with practiced sympathy. Your Honor, my client is not a criminal. She is a mother. She was desperate. All she wanted was to secure a future for her son. Then Chloe rose herself. She sniffled, her voice trembling loud enough to carry across the room. I only wanted to take care of my boy, Your Honor. My mother-in-law is not well anymore. She forgets things. She doesn't understand the strain my son faces. I never meant harm. I was only trying to protect my family. Every word was coded in false sincerity. She pressed her palms together, bowing her head like a saint, awaiting mercy. I sat still, my jaw tight, refusing to flinch, because I knew what was coming next. Brenda rose slowly, deliberate. She didn't waste words. She carried a thick binder nearly 6 inches thick and set it firmly on the evidence table. The thud echoed in the courtroom. She opened it page by page, voice clear, controlled, unshaken. Bank statements, she said, sliding copies across to the judge. Each signed authorization, every one of them falsified. Notice the inconsistent strokes, the lifted ink. Our handwriting expert confirms none of these belong to Mrs. Gray. She pulled another file, scanned copies of contracts. The Halpern investment deal Chloe tried to push through using Eleanor's property as collateral, none of which were authorized by the legal owner. Page after page, signature after signature, transaction after transaction. The pile grew higher. Chloe's face grew paler. The courtroom grew quieter. Brenda's voice cut through the stillness. This is not care. This is calculated theft, systematic exploitation of an elderly woman's trust. Chloe's facade cracked. She shifted in her chair, her tissue twisting in her fist. That's not true. She gave me permission. She doesn't remember. Her voice rose, shrill, desperate. The judge lifted a hand. Order. The room stilled again, but Chloe's panic hung in the air. Then came the exhibits, emails, text messages recovered from Chloe's phone, words dripping with entitlement. She won't know the difference. Once it's signed, the house is ours. Each message landed like a hammer blow. My chest tightened, not with fear anymore, but with the cold clarity of truth being laid bare. For months, I had doubted myself, wondered if I was strong enough to endure. Now I watched the lies peel away under the harsh light of evidence. Mark sat behind Chloe, shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He didn't raise his eyes once. Leo, pale and rigid, stared straight ahead, his hands clenched in his lap. Hours passed. Attorneys argued, evidence piled. Witnesses testified, the banker, the handwriting expert, even a notary who admitted the stamp Chloe used was fraudulent. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, and all of it pointed in one direction. Finally, after 6 relentless months, it ended. The judge leaned forward, his voice steady but heavy with finality. This court finds the defendant Chloe Dawson guilty of fraud and financial exploitation of an elder. The evidence is overwhelming, the intent clear. The sentence will follow, but the verdict is delivered now. He lifted the gavel, one sharp crack against wood, and the sound echoed like thunder through the silent room. Chloe crumpled. Her knees buckled, and she clutched the table for balance, face streaked with smeared mascara. Her sobs raw and uncontrolled now that her performance had failed. Mark buried his face in his hands. He didn't speak. He didn't defend her. He only sat frozen, the weight of silence pressing him down. Leo didn't move either. His lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. He stared at me across the courtroom, shame flickering in his eyes. Not anger, not denial, just the stunned recognition of truth he could no longer escape. I sat unmoving. My heart pounded, but I kept my spine straight, my gaze steady. Because this was not triumph. It was not revenge. It was justice, long bitter and hard-earned. The courtroom buzzed as the verdict spread, whispers from the gallery, scribbles from reporters. But all I heard was the crack of that gavel still echoing in my chest. The power Chloe had tried to strip from me was restored not with anger, not with shouting, but with proof and patience and the law. And as she sank to the floor in defeat, I finally exhaled. The storm she had unleashed was over. The clang of metal echoed as the bailiffs fastened the cuffs. Chloe's wrists jerked against the cold steel, her eyes wild, darting around the courtroom for someone to save her. But no one moved. Not Mark. Not Leo. The officers guided her toward the side door, their boots striking firm against the polished floor. For months she had strutted with arrogance, certain she was untouchable. Now her cries were faint, swallowed by the closing door. I watched, not with triumph, not with satisfaction, but with the weight of finality. My chest rose and fell in a slow rhythm, and I whispered to myself almost like a prayer. Justice sometimes arrives quietly, but today it spoke. The courtroom dispersed. Voices buzzed, chairs scraped, papers shuffled. Yet around me a stillness lingered. I felt the silence of release, the long burden that had pressed on my shoulders lifting at last. 2 weeks later, I was back in Willow Creek. The air smelled of rain that morning, crisp and clean. I carried a basket of groceries, fresh bread, ripe peaches, a small jar of honey from the corner market. My steps were steady, stronger than they had been in months. My doctor had urged me to rebuild my strength, and I listened. For the first time in years, eating wasn't an afterthought. I nourished myself deliberately as though each meal was a declaration that I was still here, still living. In the afternoons, I joined my friends on the patio of the community hall. We played cards, shared stories, and laughed at things so simple they felt like gold. The chatter of voices, the clink of teacups, the ripple of laughter, it wrapped around me like a blanket. I had always cherished solitude, but now I understood the power of companionship. Brenda often joined us. One evening, as the sun lowered in streaks of orange and purple, she placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "You carried yourself with more courage than most could ever imagine," she said softly. I turned toward her, the corners of my lips lifting into a faint smile. "I didn't carry myself alone. You carried me too." Her eyes glistened, but she said nothing more. Her silence was its own form of gratitude. The chaos of the trial became whispers in the town. Some neighbors stopped by leaving flowers at my door. Others waved with new warmth, no longer seeing me as frail or pitied, but as someone who had endured and stood tall. I did not crave their admiration, but I felt its quiet comfort. Nights grew gentler. I sipped warm tea by the window, the steam curling upward, the cup steady in my hand. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was my sanctuary again. The walls held no secrets, only the echo of my own steady breath. One evening I whispered aloud as though sealing a vow, "I am safe now." The words did not tremble. They rang clear, firm, a promise I made to myself. Because survival was not the end of my story. I had begun writing again. For years I had scattered pages of memories, essays, and reflections into drawers unfinished. Now I gathered them. Slowly, deliberately, I shaped them into a manuscript, a memoir of my journey. The nights of fear, the betrayal of blood, the steady march of resilience, all of it lived on those pages. At my desk pen, moving across paper, I paused often to breathe, to remember. Sometimes my hand shook, but I did not stop. Words that had once been too painful now poured with clarity. It was not about vengeance. It was about truth. When I finished the first draft, I closed the cover gently. A lifetime captured a story told, not for the world's approval, but for my own peace. On a golden afternoon, I joined my friends at the gazebo. The air was alive with laughter, the smell of coffee, the hum of cicadas. I held my teacup, the porcelain warm against my palms, and watched the sunlight filter through the trees, painting the table in soft patterns. No voices of accusation, no whispers of deceit, only peace. I lifted the cup, my reflection trembling faintly in the amber liquid. Around me, joy flowed effortlessly, stories, laughter, music from an old radio. And inside me, calm stretched wide, vast as the horizon. I looked at Brenda, who caught my gaze and nodded as if she understood without words. I smiled faintly, raised my cup, and let the warmth fill me. The storm had passed. My journey, scarred, bruised, but not broken, was whole now. I set the cup down gently and whispered with certainty, unshaken, "I am safe now." The sun lowered, soft light falling across my face. The world outside moved on, but inside stillness remained. And as the frame of this chapter of my life closed, the last image was not of chaos nor of grief, but of quiet strength, written in lines across my face, lit by the evening glow.